Decline of the West, Volume 1 by Spengler Oswald, 1880 to 1936. Chapter 1, Introduction. In this book is attempted for the first time the venture of determining history, of following the still unraveling stages in the destiny of culture, and specifically of the only culture of our time on our planet, which is actually in the phase of fulfillment, West European American. Here, there too, the possibility of solving a problem so far-reaching has evidently never been envisioned, and even if it had been so, the means of dealing with it were either altogether unsuspected or at best inadequately used. Is there a logic of history? Is there, above all, the casual and incalculable elements of the separate events? Sometimes that we may call a metaphysical structure of history, humanity, something that is essentially independent of structure of historic humanity, something that is essentially independent of the outward forms, social, spiritual, and political, which we see so clearly. Are not these actualities indeed secondary or derived from that something? Does world history present to the seeing eye certain grand traits again and again with sufficient consistency to justify certain conclusions? And if so, what are the limits to which reasoning from such premises may be pushed? It is possible to find in life itself, for human history is the sum of mighty life courses which already have had to be endowed with ego and personality, in customary thought and expression, by predicting entities of a higher order, like the classical or the Chinese culture, modern civilization, a series of stages which must be traversed, and traversed, moreover, in an ordered and obligatory sequence. For everything organic, the notion of birth, death, youth, age, lifetimes are fundamental. May not these notions in this sphere also possess a rigor, meaning which no one has as yet extracted? In short, is all history found upon general biographic archetypes? The decline of the West, which at first sight might appear like the corresponding decline of classical culture, a phenomenon limited in time and space, we now perceive to be a philosophical problem that, when comprehended in all its gravity, includes within itself every great question of being. If therefore we are to discover in that form the destiny of the Western culture will be accomplished, we must first be clear as to what culture is, what its relationships are to visible history, to life, to soul, to nature, to intellect, that the form of its manifestations are, and how far these forms, people, tongues, and epochs, battles and ideas, states and gods, arts and craftwork, science, laws, economic types, and world ideas, great men and great events may be accepted and pointed to as symbols. The meaning thereby is identity. Dead forms is mathematical law. The means whereby to understand living form is analogy. By these means, we are embedded to distinguish popularity, periodicity in the world. It is and has always been a matter of knowledge that the expression forms of world history are limited in number, and that eras, epochs, situation, persons are ever repeating themselves true to type. Napoleon has hardly ever been discussed without a side glance at Caesar and Alexander. Analogies which we shall see. The first is metaphorically quite unacceptable, and the second is correct. While Napoleon himself conceived of his situation akin to Charlemagne's, the French Revolution conviction spoke of Carthage when it meant England, and the Jacobeans styled themselves Rome. Other such comparisons of all degree are soundness and unsoundness, are those of Florence with Athens, Buddha with Christ, primitive Christianity with modern socialism, the Roman financial magnate of Caesar's time with the Yankee, Petrarch, the first passionate archaeologist, and is not archaeology itself an expression of the sense that history is repetition, related himself mentally to Cicero, but lately Cecil Rhodes, the organizer of British South Africa, who had in his library specifically prepared translation of the classical lives of the Caesars, felt himself akin to Emperor Adrian. The fated Charles XII of Sweden used to carry Quintus Curtius' Life of Alexander in his pocket, and a copy that Conqueror was his deliberate purpose. Frederick the Great, in his political writings, such as his Considerations, 1738, moves among analogies with perfect assurances. Thus he compares the French to the Macedonians under Philip, and the Germans to the Greeks. Even now, he says, the Thermopylae of Germany, Alsace and Lorraine, are in the hands of Philip. Therein exactly characterizes the policy of Cardinal Fleury. We find him drawing parallels also between the policy of the houses of Habsburg and Bourbon and the prescriptions of Anthony and Octavius. Still, all this was only fragmentary and arbitrary, and usually implied rather a momentary inclination to political or ingenious expression than a really deep sense of historical form. Thus, in the case of Ranke, a master of artistic analogies, we find that his parallels to Cyrus and Henry the Flower of the inroads of the Samians and those of Hungarians possess metaphorically no significance, and his oft-quoted analogy between the Hellenic city-states and the Renaissance republics very little, while the deeper truth in his comparisons of Alcibiades and Napoleon is accidental. Unlike the strict mathematician who finds interrelationship between two groups of different equations where the layman sees nothing but the similarities of outward form, Ranke and other drawn their historical analogies to a Plutarchian popular romantic touch and aim merely at presenting comparable scenes on the world stage. It is easy to see that at bottom it is neither the principle nor the sense of historic necessity, but simply inclination that governs the choice of the tableaus from any technique of analogies. We are far distant. They throng up today more than ever, without schemes or unity, and if they do hit upon something which is true in the essential sense of the word, that remains to be determined. It is thanks to luck, more rarely to instinct, never to a principle. In this region, no one hereto has set himself to work out a method, nor has had the slightest inkling that there is here a root. In fact, the only root from which can come a broad solution of the problems of history. Analogies, insofar as they laid bare the organic structure of history, might be a blessing to historical thought. Their technique, developing under the influence of a comprehensive idea, would surely eventuate in inevitable conclusions and logical mastery. But as hereto understood and practiced, they have been a curse, for they have enabled the historians to follow their own taste instead of somberly realizing that their first and hardest task was concerned with the symbolism of history and its analogies, and in consequence the problem has till now not even been comprehended, let alone solved. Superficial, and in many cases, as for instance the designating of Caesar as the creator of the official newspaper, these analogies are worse than superficial in others, as when phenomenon of the classical age that are not only extremely complex but utterly alien to us are labeled with modern catchphrases like socialism, imperialism, capitalism, clericism, while occasionally they are bizarre to the point of perversity. Witness the Jacobin clubs with their cult of Brutus, that millionaire extortioner Brutus, who, in the name of oligarchical doctrine and with the approval of the patrician state, murdered a man of democracy. Section 3. Thus, our theme, which originally comprised only the limited problem of present-day civilization, broadens itself into a new philosophy, the philosophy of the future, so far as the metaphysical exhausted soil of the West can bear such, and in any case the only philosophy which is within the possibilities of the Western European mind in the next stage. It expands into the conception of a morphology of world history, of world as history, in contrast to the morphology of the world as nature that hereto has been almost the only theme of philosophy. and it reviews once again the form and movements of the world in their depth and final significance, but this time according to an entirely different ordering, which groups them not in an assembled picture inclusive of everything known, but in a picture of life, and presents them not as things become, but as things becoming. The world as history, conceived, viewed, and given form from out of its opposite as the world is nature. Here is a new aspect of human existence on this earth. As yet, in spite of its immense significance, both practical and theoretical, this aspect has not been realized, still less presented. Some obscure inkling of it there may have been, a distant momentary glimpse there has often been, but no one has deliberately faced it and taken it with all its implications. We have before us two possible ways in which man may inwardly possess and experience the world around him. With all rigor I distinguish as to form, not substance, the organic form, the mechanical world impression, the content of images from that of laws, the pictures and symbols from the formula and the system, the instantly actual from the constantly possible, the intents and purpose of imagination ordering according to plan from the intent and purpose of experience, dissecting according to scheme, and to mention even thus early in opposition that has never yet been noted, in spite of its significance, the domain of chronological from that of mathematical number. Consequently, in the research such as the lying before us, there can be no question of taking spiritual political events as they become visible day by day on the surface at their face value and arranging them on a scheme of causes and effects, and following them up in the obvious intellectual easy direction, such as pragmatic handling of history would be nothing but a piece of natural science in disguise. And for their part, the supporters of the mathematical idea of history make no secret about it. It is their adversaries who largely fail to see the similarities of the two methods. That concerns us is not that the historical facts which appear at this or that are per se, but what they signify, that they point to by appearing. Present-day historians think they are doing a work of supererogation in bringing in religious and social, or still more art history details to illustrate the political sense of an epoch. But the decisive factor, that is, insofar as visible history is the expression, sign, embodiment of soul, they forget. I have not hereto found one who has carefully considered the morphical relationships that inwardly bind together the expression forms of all branches of culture. who has gone beyond politics to grasp the ultimate fundamental idea of Greeks, Arabians, Indians, Westerns in mathematics, the meaning of footnote, Kant's error, an error of very wide bearing which has not even yet overcome, was first of all in bringing the outer and inner man into relation with the ideas of space and time by pure schema, though the meaning of these are numerous and above all not unalterable, and secondly in unlying alien arithmetic with the one and geometry with the other in utterly mistakable ways. It is not between arithmetic and geometry we must here anticipate a little, but between chronological and mathematical numbers, that there is fundamental opposition. Arithmetic and geometry are both which the plain man is capable of perfectly understanding through his senses, answers the question when, not what or how many. Introduction, page 7. Early ornamentation and basic forms of their architecture, philosophy, dramas, and lyrics, their choice of development of great arts, the details of their craftsmanship, the choice of materials, let alone appreciated the decisive importance of these matters for the form problems of history. Who amongst them realizes that between the differential calculus and the dynastic principles of politics in the age of Louis XIV, between the classical city-state and the Euclidean geometry, between the space perspective of Western oil paintings and the conquest of space by railroad, telephone, long-range weapons, between contrapunctual music and credit economies, there are deep uniformities. Yet, viewed from this morphological standpoint, even the humdrum fact of political assumes a symbolic and even a metaphysical character, and what has perhaps been impossible hitherto, things such as Egyptian administrative systems, the classical coinage, analytical geometry, the check, the Suez Canal, the book printing of the Chinese, the Persian army, the Roman road engineers, can, as symbols, be made uniformly understandable and appreciable.